Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here today to continue with ENISE and the 16th edition of ENISE. Today, we have the pleasure of having on board an incredible speakers that represent great companies, Iberia, Naturgy, Sacyr, and Telefonica. And as I mentioned at the beginning, good governance and cybersecurity deals with what? With the evolution of cybersecurity. Since the 80s and 90s and the 2000s, cybersecurity is being transformed even better, and it's becoming a business strategy for companies. Companies like Apple, as you know, in the last 2 or 3 years, managed to identify that 30% of clients buy products thanks to or precisely due to security. So this is an element that added value to their product. So this happens to many companies that incorporate security in their business strategy. So it is a multidisciplinary approach that should be integrated in all of the activities or contribute to meeting the goals of the companies in terms of products. This is what we are going to talk about. So cybersecurity involves directors of a company that should really be involved as auditors and people who really encourage for security. So, Jesus, what is the cost if we're not able to involve to make the board be on board of cybersecurity? Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to INCIBE and ENISE Forum for the invitation. Well, the cost, it's clearly going to be big due to many reasons. I think an important aspect is regulation. Regulation is going to have a heavier weight in the future, which leads to incorporating cybersecurity in board of directors. So the government level should be interested in this topic. So regardless of the potential cybersecurity incident that we might have with associated costs, all the topic of fines or non-compliance or reputational impact is also important. So I think the message is clear and powerful for any board member to be interested firsthand in being part, as you mentioned, be part of the decision making. So the CIS is important, but also other experts are important because our responsibility is our responsibility, but our responsibility should be shared by all the most important stakeholders in a company or organization. Thank you, Jesus. From a point of view of a company as like Telefonica, this is the only cost, or the other cost is lagging behind production. So is there any other cost related to sanctions, or when we are not able to have the board be on board? First of all, thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. I partially agree with what my colleague mentioned before. The regulation aspect is important, but as you mentioned as well, we are living in a digital world. 360 degrees digital our world is. And as Gianluca, you mentioned before, companies consider now a main feature, meaning security as their main definition, not only for the services they provide to clients, but also cybersecurity in the way they function internally. So the difference over the last 10 years, there's no wolf anymore. The wolf has been here. All the sheep have been eaten. Pens have all disappeared. So the risk has materialized in something real. So the emergency situation exists at all levels. At a board level, but it all depends on company, obviously, because the differences exist, and many companies do not fully understand what it is. But also at an executive level and organizational level, this should be incorporated. So security should be part of the 360 digital degree we are all in, because society lives in these 360 digital degrees on a daily basis. So this should be a lever, but even if it is not enough. Jesus, in Naturgy's cybersecurity is there to stay from a board of directors point of view, but what is the role of the board at Naturgy in terms of cybersecurity good governance from a strategy point of view? Well, good afternoon, and thank you, ENISE, for the invitation. Naturgy evolved as many other companies evolved. For years, cybersecurity risks are among the top topics of top 5, I would say, of risks and concerns of all the directors of many companies. And for years, we've been reporting this to the board. The board has been really interested in cybersecurity, and we've been evolving to such an extent that through our corporate governance bodies and the delegated bodies by the board report on cybersecurity every time a audit and control process happen. So there's still a long way to go because it's very general. In bigger companies, cybersecurity is listed in the board agenda, and there is a survey for the top 120, and 84% of boards have cybersecurity as a priority. However, there's still a long way to go. I think around how risks are dealt with by board of directors is still missing something, because this risk should be dealt with at the same level as other risks of companies. And there's still a long way to go in many companies. Some of them are listed in the stock exchange, and I believe many of these companies do not have this incorporated in their agenda, or they don't have the priority it should have. This is a question for Luis. So we've seen where cybersecurity is and should be. So Luis, let me ask you, should you make a wish list? And what would be the relationship between the CIO and the board? So how should they support you or help you? First of all, thank you, INCIBE and ENISE, for organizing this, and thank my colleagues for accompanying me. I believe the board is only looking at one thing: business. The CISO is there to foster traction security applications to benefit the business. So there are two main questions. Cybersecurity should talk to the board and ask the board to foster cybersecurity measures. And we need to use two things. First of all, indicators. So the controls should be associated to the business and to make easy for the business, the compliance section, the regulatory part, and allow the business ensure to be more efficient. Once the CISOs will be able, as Maria mentioned, to support business unit, the board are going to see us as facilitators instead of seeing us as stoppers, or the cybersecurity responsible who is always raising barriers for all the things that are related to business. So we have two elements. And active thing, the potential cyber incident, and then the impact. If we are able to manage all this, and if we manage to make the board see us as a friend, instead of a person putting obstacles, that would be good in my opinion. Okay, Liz, you were not really very much into it. So let me ask you again, wish list. How do you want the relationship between you and the board to be? As Luis mentioned, okay, someone else who's not going to be really into it. But beyond everything, I think there are like two ways. The board seeing at the CISO, and the CISO should work for the board to see him this way. So this is double relationship, and then there's important lever we can explain, because we are all involved in digital transformation processes, and there's no transformation without the cybersecurity officer. So as you can see, it was easier. So cybersecurity should be considered as another business feature that should be supported, audited, obviously, and fostered. Okay, thank you very much. The first 20 minutes, so that was like putting this into context. Now, governance. Governance principles of cybersecurity for the board. What are the 2 or 3 main principles, the ABC, the board should internalize? Yeah, I'm thinking about the board because I don't have to think about our work group. So in my personal opinion, my experience with the board has been good, because the board has one question to ask. And this question is related to the organization of cybersecurity, which is pertinent, in my opinion. It's not only a CISO or the maximum responsible for cybersecurity that has to report to the board, but it's something that goes beyond that. How cybersecurity is organized within a company, and how this is part of a cyber network in business and in the corporate network. And also, something that is more recent is how we manage talent of cybersecurity within a corporation. I think this is relevant, and this requires governance as well. I'm not talking about external collaborators, but also internal talent that must be generated in all the units of the organization, not only in the cybersecurity department. So, cyber talents. All this organizational part is extremely important, in my opinion. Secondly, resilience. This should be put on the table, resilience model. The board questions all this and requires more information. Resilience should be more efficient than the resilience we put in place for other things. So we need to have a good model for all the models, especially the board and everything that has to be implemented in times of crisis, contingency plans, verification of all the mechanisms, etc. And all this, as mentioned before, this should be also extended to the chain of supply. So this should be very important, having a resilience model. And the third element is more internal. You need to have good cybersecurity government from the cybersecurity units and with the business. So you need to have good policies, good controls, and you need to identify your maturity degree. You compare this with the people, and then you report to the board consistently. So this element should be well established. So organization, resilience, and good governance at an internal level, good governance of cybersecurity at an internal level in a company. Thank you very much. Would you like to add any principle missing? Autonomy, independence, resources, intelligence? Yeah, everything. All of them. All of the above. Okay, Alvaro? How does a board transform for them to understand things better. Telefonica is an example. You have embedded cybersecurity within the board agenda. Telefonica, we have, I believe, a system that works well. We included this at all levels. The board agenda has included this through the delegated commission, and this is something that is always being analyzed, both regular reporting and the analysis of the extraordinary activity that might happen whenever the board require updating, for example, when emergencies happen. Also, we have a body with an executive subcommittee working at a more operational level, because the board activities are more storytelling. That's at the board level. So storytelling at the board level and something which is more tangible at the level of the executive committee, as I mentioned before, which is more operational, and then all the interactions, multilateral interactions with their peers, because cybersecurity is an example of this interaction. For example, the forum or other initiatives have shown that this field requires a great deal of collaboration. So multilateral collaborations that we might have, but also we have an advisory council in terms of security, or a security advisory council that and members of this executive subcommittee are part of this advisory council. The CEO is one of them. So this allows us for benchmarking, which is extremely important for the board. So not only a one-color narrative, but a rather multiple narrative. So the board has all this, and for many reasons, we make our annual report visible, which is published, and everything is controlled, supervised, and audited. As you mentioned before, governance must have a clarity of with ideas, which is very important in my opinion. Question. Corporate social responsibility, reports. This should be, cybersecurity should be part of this social corporate responsibility reports. Yeah, we have included cybersecurity, a specific chapter in our reports for years, 2 or 3 years now, because this is closely related to responsibility, and this is related to something else. The capacity building and the awareness raising among all the employees, but also the board. So not only do we talk about business and we translate indicators to the business for the board to understand, but also the board should understand how is the cybersecurity market and all the requirements, so that capacity building, mutual capacity building, is good to align cybersecurity process together with the business. I think these are important elements. Do the reports of your companies include cybersecurity? Yes. This is something important, not only for the company's report, but also for the sustainability report of the company, because the CSG goals are related to government, and government, for the companies, cybersecurity is important, and this is one of the important topics you need to prove evidence of. You need to prove evidence of your commitments made and accomplished. So all these are being passed on to the supply chain. There are conditions on privacy, for example, for data, for data management. So cyber, sustainability, human rights are all passed on to the supply chain. And all cybersecurity and security incidents that might affect companies. Okay, for all this kind of pressure, I don't want to call this pressure, but in infrastructure, our investment in this infrastructure and then passing all this idea on to the rest of the chain is important, I believe. In this domain, so the CISO have access to the board starts to become knowledgeable of cybersecurity, and then the board will challenge you with questions. So, but what would these questions be? I think this is important, but so what is the challenge? How are you going to be questioned? How are you going to be challenged by the board? That is the question. I think there are two very important questions to be asked. First of all, level of maturity, how secure we are. The level of maturity, that might be one level or the other. And then the second question is, are we prepared in the event of an effective incident to recover the business with the same level, with a lower impact in terms of regulation, in terms of compliance, and in terms of respecting the contracts we have signed with the customers? This is the second question. And also, how long are we going to take to recover service and resume service? Yeah, but so the opposite challenge to the board, these questions depend on something we mentioned before. This depend on capacity building, on training, and security. So it all depends on the internal knowledge of the company and of the board as well. When the board challenges you, that was the question. But this is what Jesus is mentioning. There is a point when you have to pick up the glove and say, there's something positive here, because you might raise awareness, etc., but the CISO should leave the comfort zone and return the challenge in terms of business, EBITDA. He or she must use this moment, and the most important thing is to create the need in the board of supervision. This is extremely important because at one point in time, because you've had a maturity report or for some other reasons, if this led to the board being concerned, well, the board is going to say, there's room for improvement, we need to regain or increase maturity, and at that point in time, the board is going to ask you for a plan. So this generates what I call periodicity, frequency, I would say. So instead of having the board challenge you every now and again, there will be a regular questioning. So if I were to choose, I would choose this, supervision by the board. In the case of Telefonica, this happens already. So you mentioned to me before that you collaborate to prepare the information that is raised. So how do you live this up the day before when you're coming up with the last details of the report? And how do you choose the information? How do you pick and choose the information to come up with a stable reporting to the board? I'm not going to say that the day before there's no tension, because tension is always there, but tension is more a stage tension than an execution or performance tension, because you cannot improv before the board. So, as someone said before, it's a history, memory, regular, frequent activity, which should be this way. Otherwise, it's a one-night stand, and this is not the idea. The idea is to have a stable partnership with the board. So the narrative, and you mentioned maturity, I disagree a little bit with that, but I believe the appropriate narrative is risk. Meaning, if I was the board, the question would be not about the level of maturity, because in the past, when didn't have this maturity vision incorporated, the first thing they might ask is, what does this mean? And we have indicators, and we follow up the indicators very rigorously. So the most important thing is risk, in my opinion. If I were a board member, and this is what they questioned us about, is what are the risks? And our presentation, our pitch, is talking about risks in the board language. You don't talk about risks, even if they are very valuable inputs of the World Forum or similar, but we talk about risks, as Luis mentioned before, we talk about risks of my assets, my process, my businesses, my clients, my geography. So at the end of the day, you have to land detail in the details, because you're looking at the board member in the eye, and he understands business, finance, technology, because they are entrepreneurs and businessmen. So these are people who understand business very well. And as you mentioned before, language should be based on business risks. And the second question is, what do I do to minimize risks? So there would be an intermediate question: is the risk high or low? So the likelihood of impact is part of the answer, and then the other part of the answer is what I have to do to solve it. And then there's a third question after your wish list, etc., and budget, etc. The question is, where are you going to set the line? Well, cybersecurity should be in this framework. I think these are the questions to ask or by the board. Do you agree? Yes. Risks and controls. We have 2.5 minutes. One question. Last questions, probably. Cybersecurity should be part of ongoing education of a board member. Board members should know about cybersecurity, like pills of knowledge or something, or more in-depth knowledge. I'll start. They should have this specific training, and it's actually been done. One of the best training for a board member compared to an executive committee is the execution of drilling exercises, like crisis simulation exercises, and they get really frightened because they see real things in real time practically. And I think this is the most important activity in terms of education of a board member. And somehow, I guess, this is what commits them the most. And this leads to asking them the questions that come to their mind, which helps you in this iteration process to think about the next crisis simulation, because when they ask questions, you understand whether or not they understood the thing or not.
So to manage any crisis, you need information. Yes, if we are dealing with cybersecurity as part of the business, this is one more requirement. From a training perspective, obviously it has a very powerful technical connotation, but as Alejandro mentioned, when it is oriented to risks, to crisis management, I think it's the perfect scenario. Yes, it's something we can't escape from. I totally agree with my colleagues. At the end of the day, it's one of the top risks for any business. Nobody can say that they're not under that risk. There must be certain business training involved, not so much technical training because it makes no sense, but rather training on what the security risk there may be for the business. Yes, as I pointed out initially, these are some basic fundamentals on cybersecurity and the impact that they might have for the business. You don't really need to know a lot about ransomware, but rather you need to know about how it may impact, it may have an impact on the business, and to give the different players feedback about something as important as the business itself and how processes may recover and be resilient to any sort of incident. Well, I would like to thank the INCIBE for the interesting panel that I have been able to moderate, and I would like to have a round of applause, and I hope that you all enjoyed this talk. So let's have a round of applause.